Hi, my name is Eliza Fox, and I'm a senior private counselor with Top Tier Admissions. I am delighted to welcome you today to our webinar on extracurriculars that count, which is part of our ongoing webinar series to help students navigate the college admissions process. The goal of the webinar today is to give you insight into how extracurricular activities are used in the admissions process and to help you figure out how you can find high impact activities for yourself. The presentation should run about 20 to 25 minutes, and I'll leave time at the end for a Q&A where I'll be joined by my colleague, Dr. Tina Brooks, who is very generously moderating this webinar. If you're listening to the recording of this call, unfortunately, we won't be able to include the Q&A in the recording, but I hope the presentation itself will be helpful to you. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to me or Tina. So to begin, when we're thinking about extracurriculars, it's important to first define what extracurricular activities actually entail. Most of us have a general sense of what extracurriculars look like. That might include sports or school clubs or internships or volunteer work. But there are other items that also fall under this umbrella. That might be research projects or jobs or family obligations like caring for siblings or grandparents. Basically, an extracurricular activity is anything you do outside of your coursework, especially things that take up significant amounts of time. They're important because US colleges use what's called a holistic admissions process. That is, they look at the whole person, not just at academic data when making admissions decisions. And within this process, extracurricular activities provide insight into you as a person. By looking at how you spend your limited free time outside of school, admissions officers can learn about your values, they can learn about your intellectual and personal interests, they can learn about your potential to contribute to a community, which is important since you will be joining a college community pretty soon. It's important to remember, though, that extracurriculars are just one piece of the admissions puzzle. In addition to your activities, admissions officers are looking at your grades and the rigor of your coursework, your standardized test scores, your recommendations from your teacher and from your school college counselor, at the application essays you've written, and also at notes from your admissions interview if it's an evaluative interview. And it's important to note that within this large pool of data, extracurriculars are less important than grades and test scores. Most admissions officers will review your grades and test scores first to determine if you are an academically viable candidate at their institution. And if you are, that's fantastic. They will do a careful assessment of your extracurricular activities. If you're not, they might give your activities a brief skim to see if you are a superstar in that area, but they're likely not going to do a deep dive. To put this another way, because I think it's a really important point, extracurricular activities will not get you into a school that you are not qualified for academically. And I'm emphasizing this point, demoralizing as it sounds, because I think it's really helpful when it comes to organizing your time. You never want to prioritize extracurricular activities over coursework or test prep, especially as more and more schools are switching back to requiring standardized test scores. Instead, you want to devote your time to grades and to earning strong test scores, and then use the time that you have left to pursue extracurricular activities. That's not to say extracurricular activities aren't important. In fact, once you're in range for a school, they are crucial. Top schools are deluged with straight A applicants with fantastic test scores. Harvard has gone on record and said we could fill our incoming class with valedictorians twice over and still have leftover valedictorians in our applicant pool. So within that very, very crowded, very talented pool, extracurricular activities can be the key factor that moves an applicant to committee consideration and from there to acceptance. But given that you have limited free time for extracurricular activities because you are focused on grades and test scores, it's crucial to pursue high impact activities that are going to serve you well in the admissions process. And the question then becomes, how can you identify these activities and how can you find activities to pursue? In our work with top tier clients, we encourage students to focus on a few things, and I'm going to walk you through those things right now. So first, we want to pick activities that highlight your interests. Extracurricular activities offer an opportunity to show admissions officers what you care about academically and personally. It's one thing to say, I plan to major in history, or I really care about the environment. But if you haven't done anything to support those statements, admissions officers have no reason to believe you. So when choosing extracurricular activities, it's a good idea to pick activities that highlight your interests. If, as we have sketched out here, you have a passion for environmental science, you might do an environmental research project or participate in eco-focused activities like Science Olympiad, maybe the ecology events. You might start an initiative to fight climate change. If you're interested in creative writing, you might participate in writing workshops or publish your poetry or edit your school's literary magazine. Activities like these will show admissions officers what you care about, which will make you a more compelling applicant. In addition, interest-focused extracurricular activities can help shape admissions officers' elevator pitch for you. And to explain that a little bit, in many admissions offices, although not all, admissions decisions are not made by one person. Some offices read applications collaboratively from the very first round. So from the beginning, you have multiple people looking at your application basically simultaneously. Other offices move applications from one reader to committee. So typically your regional admissions officer, which is the admissions officer who covers your country or your state or your city, depending on how dense that pool is, will review your application, and then they'll take it to committee, and they'll put together an elevator pitch to basically advocate for you to their committee. So they might say, Sally is a horseback rider and a champion debater who's done really interesting research in microbiology. Or Henry is a really dedicated historian who has done standout work at his local history museum and who has, really advocated for immigrants in his community. Basically, the more your activities highlight and align with your interests, the easier it is for an admissions officer to A, understand your application, and B, put together a compelling pitch about you for their admissions committee. One exercise you can do with this in mind is ask yourself, how would an admissions officer looking at my extracurricular activities summarize me? Are my activities telling an accurate story about me? If they're not, that's an indication that you may need to refocus your activities to illuminate your interests. In addition, admissions officers will use your extracurricular activities to look for evidence of leadership. Admissions officers want to admit students who are leaders in their communities, and what that community looks like can vary. It could be your school community or a volunteer community, your state, your neighborhood. Leadership roles can also take lots of different forms, and we've listed some here. So some common definitions of leadership might include club president or class president or captain of an athletic team. But leadership can also mean taking a role in politics as a member of the mayor's youth council or founding a service organization or a community initiative to address a cause that's meaningful to you. It can mean creating something that uplifts your local community, like free workshops for underserved students at your local library. When it comes to leadership, we encourage students to think about the types of leadership that they feel comfortable with. So some students are overwhelmed by the prospect of running for class president, and that's okay. If that's you, could you instead launch a school club that addresses an issue that's important to you, or work with administrators at your school to make your school carbon neutral? At its core, leadership is about initiative. It's about taking action and making change. But what that looks like in practice is entirely up to you. Admissions officers are also going to pay attention to the selectivity of your activities. The more selective your activities are, the more impressive you appear to be in that area, and the more you stand out as a candidate. So we've listed here some examples of really selective activities, like top STEM programs like RSI and BU Rise that have very low acceptance rates and admit only hyper-qualified applicants. Humanities programs like TAS or the Iowa Young Writers Studio, which similarly admit only a very small number of the students who apply. Elite academic teams like Math Olympiad that use multiple rounds of testing to identify the most qualified students, positions like Senate Page that only take a small number of students per state, or accomplishments within an organization. A great example of this is Eagle Scout, which requires a lot of work, and it's a position that only about 5% of Boy Scouts actually reach. So, all of these are selective in their own way. Admissions officers are going to be familiar with the top programs in different fields, and some admissions offices actually keep lists of the top most selective programs, especially in STEM fields. So if you've participated in RSI or in TAS, they know what that is, they will flag that in your profile, and that will help you stand out in the admissions process. That said, they're not going to be familiar with every instance of selectivity on your profile, especially if you've participated in things that are selective at your school or local level. So if you have been selected for honor council at your school and there were 40 applicants for honor council and they only pick one student each year, and that was you, that's amazing. But admissions officers probably aren't going to recognize how selective that is. You can and should tell them in your application. So in your essays or in your list of activities on the Common App, you can note how selective this was. And admissions officers, if they see that, will give you credit, but it's important when you're valuing your activities and looking at your extracurricular profile, it's important not to give too much weight to local and school instances of selectivity because they're not going to be quite as compelling as national and international achievements. That said, it doesn't mean you don't want to pursue them at all. It can certainly show that you're a standout student within your community. So, if you have an opportunity for something selective that's based at your school or based locally, it's definitely worth pursuing. Awards and publications also offer another opportunity to stand out, and they make clear that you're a strong candidate for college admissions. There are lots of different types of awards, and we've listed some here. So school awards, like the book award, or some schools give awards for good character. Local or regional awards, like the winner of your state level science fair or state level National History Day contest. National awards, like National Youth Poet Laureate or Coca-Cola Scholar. And then we don't have it here, but there are international awards. The one that comes to mind right now is Foil Young Poets, because that runs during July, which has a global pool of applicants. As you might anticipate, national and international awards are going to carry the most weight in admissions, since they have the largest pool of students competing for them. But that doesn't mean you want to overlook smaller awards for a couple of reasons. One is that a host of community level awards can speak to your strong work that you're doing in your area. Some school awards can also highlight academic excellence. So, for example, at some schools, although not all, winning the Harvard Book Award means that you are the top student in your class. And it's a great way to show admissions officers that you are valedictorian, especially if your school doesn't officially rank students. Local and state awards can also make you more competitive for national level scholarships and awards. The saying goes, everybody wants to bet on a winning horse. So if you seem like a standout student in your area, that makes it easier for national awards committees to support you. Publications also give you an opportunity to showcase your strengths as a thinker and a researcher. And we've listed some venues here for publication. They can include your own blog or your school newspaper, a local newspaper, maybe you write a column or you've submitted an op-ed, peer-reviewed journals for high school students like the Concord Review or the National High School Journal of Science, and then peer-reviewed academic or professional journals like at the very top, maybe Nature or ELH. And once again, we have organized these according to prestige, but that doesn't mean you should discount the lowest level items on this list. If you are a historian and you start a blog that chronicles your research on history over the past 4 years, that shows admissions officers that you have a long-standing interest in the subject. It's also worth noting that the top item on this list, the academic or professional journals, can be really hard to access on your own. Depending on the journal, it could be that the only way into those is as a contributor based on your work with a faculty mentor. So if you write an independent paper and submit it and you're not accepted, that's not a referendum on your work. It just means that they're not targeting high school students. In addition, admissions officers are looking for students who will work to benefit their community and uplift others. A lot of high school students complete just enough volunteer work to fulfill a service requirement or check a box, but they're not doing work that's meaningful to them. To stand out in the admissions process, you want to make an impact in your community by working on an issue that's important to you. There isn't a one-size-fits-all way to do that, but there are a few things we'd encourage you to keep in mind when you're thinking about doing work that makes a community impact. So first, we encourage you to recognize a need. What issues is your community facing? What problems would you like to solve? Maybe there's an issue that's relevant to you personally. Perhaps you're part of an underserved community that you'd like to support. Once you've identified an issue that you care about, then you want to find compelling opportunities to address it. You might volunteer with one or more local organizations that are carrying out work to address the issue, or if there aren't organizations that work on this in your area, or there are gaps in the kind of coverage that they provide, you might launch your own initiative to address the issue, and that would show both community engagement and leadership, which would be great. You can also think about approaching an issue from multiple angles. So you might work with a local organization to address an issue that's important to you, and also launch a school club based around that issue and also blog about it. Basically a lot of work around one issue shows that it's meaningful to you. As you think about community impact, though, it's important to remember that not all service positions are created equal. So if you launch a service organization that supports hundreds of people and has won multiple awards, that's going to be far more meaningful than somebody who launched a school club that has 3 members. It's also important to remember that admissions officers care about the time that you have devoted to a service initiative. So if you spent 3 years working at a community organization, that's better than spending 3 months at that organization, because it shows that the issue that they are working to address is meaningful to you. A few final notes here, and I realize I've been talking for a while, so I will try to go through these quickly. Originality is important when it comes to extracurricular activities. Admissions officers see thousands of applications every year, and a lot of students care about the same subjects and the same issues. So it's very easy for applicants to run together, especially if you're doing the same activities as a lot of other students. You can help yourself stand out by taking an original approach to your interests. For example, if you're interested in biomedicine, maybe you have volunteered at a medical clinic and taken part in the biology Olympiad and done a biomedical research project. All of those things are great, but a lot of students who are interested in biomedicine do those things. So you might think about if there's a more unusual angle you can take. Maybe you 3D print prosthetics, or you take the research that you've done for your biomedical research project on carcinogens and vape pens, and you use that to launch a community initiative trying to reduce teen vaping. Basically, the less conventional your approach, the more you will stand out as an applicant. We should also talk about balance, or more specifically, how it's okay to be unbalanced as an applicant. We sometimes talk to students and especially parents who have this idea that as a student, you have to check a bunch of extracurricular boxes. You need one sport and one club and one volunteer activity. And it's true that you do want to have multiple activities on your record that showcase particular interests and focuses in your community, but it's okay if you lean more towards one or two particular areas. If you are not a writer, you don't need to write for the school newspaper. If you are not an athlete, you don't need to play a sport. And I was not an athlete in high school, so that news was wonderful for me. In fact, it's often better to lean into your areas of strength, since that makes it easier for admissions officers to identify your interests and to make that elevator pitch for you. As for time commitment, we mentioned previously, admissions officers are going to consider the length of time you have devoted to particular activities. So they're looking for serious, sustained work. The earlier you can start doing meaningful activities, the better. A lot of short-term activities can actually be a red flag, especially if they're in a lot of different subjects. That suggests maybe that you're chasing resume building activities rather than pursuing your authentic interests. And finally, a quick word about athletics, because this comes up a lot. Playing a sport can be very, very meaningful if you are recruited. And we'll actually have a separate webinar about athletic recruitment in the fall. So if that is of interest to you, please tune in for that. But outside of recruitment, athletics are not uniquely meaningful. They can be a lot of fun. They can offer opportunities for leadership and teamwork. But to piggyback on my earlier note about balance, you don't need to play a sport. And it's actually worth asking yourself, if you're committing a lot of time to athletics, are you enjoying the sport that you're playing? Do you have opportunities for leadership in it? If not, if you're not enjoying the sport and it's not really your area of strength, it's okay to say, I'm going to let this go and explore other interests. So to put this all together, I thought I'd show you what extracurricular profiles can look like in practice. So here we have a sample resume from Activity Alice, who attends Charlottesville High School, which I picked because it is just down the road from me. Alice has carried out a number of activities and she's done some things really well. So we can see that she has an interest in international relations thanks to her summer program and her work with Model UN. And she's carried out some activities to uplift her community, like volunteering at a local food pantry. But her extracurricular profile isn't likely to help her much in the admissions process for a couple reasons. First, her activities are not particularly selective. They're also not really focused. She's got an interest in international relations, but she's also pursuing digital music and photography and general service activities through Key Club. So we're just not getting a clear picture of what she cares about. Her work in the community also isn't super sustained. She volunteered with a food pantry in 10th grade and then stopped and joined Key Club in 12th grade. So we're not really seeing a commitment to an issue that she cares about. The final red flag, and this is probably the biggest one, is that we're not seeing a sustained time commitment. She started most of these activities in 12th grade. And if we look at this with our admissions officer goggles on, we can almost feel her panic as the college admissions process looms and she realizes that she doesn't have that much on her extracurricular profile and she frantically signs up for activities in 12th grade. If we compare her to our second case study, Extracurricular Ethan, we can see what a more compelling extracurricular profile might look like. So Ethan is exactly the same as Alice academically. He goes to the same high school, he has the same GPA and test scores, but his extracurricular activities will rate much higher with admissions officers. Like Alice, he has an interest in international relations, but he has pursued this through very selective programs like the National Security Language Initiative for Youth, and he's carried out research, and he's actually published work in this area, which you'll remember is an impressive thing to do. He has long-term investments in his activities, so he's been working with his school's Foreign Affairs Journal and Student Council since freshman year, and he now has leadership positions with both groups. He also has a clear issue that he cares about. In this case, it's immigration, which he has supported as an ESL tutor and by launching his own immigration initiative. Based on all of this, it's relatively easy for admissions officers to understand what Ethan cares about and to make a compelling a compelling elevator pitch for him, since he has clear interests and he has done strong work in this area. As opposed to Alice, whose interests are kind of diffuse, it's much harder to present her in a compelling way. So that ends our presentation on extracurricular activities. I hope it has given you a clear overview of some of the important considerations for students as they're developing their profile. We're going to now turn to our Q&A. Again, the recording will not include this, so if you're watching the recording and you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, Eliza at toptieradmissions.com, to my colleague Tina, who is moderating this. She's Tina at toptieradmissions.com. It's also worth noting that we have a number of programs that cover extracurricular activities, so if you would like help planning out an extracurricular profile and developing that, we work with students to do that every day in our private counseling and bootcamp programs. If you are a senior looking or heading into senior year, looking down the barrel of college admissions, and you'd like help organizing your extracurricular activities and highlighting the ones that are really meaningful, we do that with students as part of our essay guidance program. So if you have any questions about those, again, you can reach out to me or Tina. You can also reach out to info@toptieradmissions.com, where we can walk you through the various programs that we offer. Thanks again so much for tuning in, and we'll now turn to our Q&A.